When I was younger, I used to think my father didn't understand me. He was quiet, traditional, and careful with his words, and I was everything opposite. Loud, restless, always in a hurry to leave home and chase something bigger. I thought I knew what life was about. He thought I didn't know enough yet. That difference became the wall between us. I still remember the morning I left home. The sun wasn't even up. He stood near the gate, his hands deep in his coat pockets, his face calm but distant. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask me to stay. He just said, "Take care of yourself." And I, too proud to look back, just nodded and walked away. For years, that image stayed in my mind. My father, standing at the gate as I walked away, thinking I was walking toward a better life. Back then, I didn't realize that sometimes walking away means losing something you can never get back. Life in the city was fast. Noisy streets, bright lights, endless faces. At first, it was exciting. I had a small job, a tiny apartment, and a big dream. I believed I was finally free. Free from small-town silence, free from my father's questions, free from everything that felt ordinary. In those first few months, I hardly thought about home. I told myself I was too busy, work was demanding, friends were new, and the city never slept. But every night when I lay in bed, I'd hear his voice in my head, calm, steady, asking the same question he used to ask every evening. "Did you eat?" I never replied to that voice. I'd just turn to the other side and fall asleep. My father wasn't the kind of man who said, "I love you." He showed it in small ways. Fixing my bicycle without telling me, keeping the porch light on when I came home late, placing an extra roti on the plate even when I said I wasn't hungry. But I was too young to see that as love. I saw it as control. I saw it as old-fashioned care I didn't need. We spoke less and less after I moved. At first, there were calls once a week, then once a month, then only on birthdays or New Year's. He never complained. He'd always start the call with the same question. "Are you eating well?" And I'd give the same short answer. "Yes, Dad. Don't worry." Then silence. Neither of us knew what to say next. Years went by like that. I built my career, moved into a better apartment, and started living what I thought was the life I wanted. But sometimes, on weekends, I'd make a cup of tea and stare out the window, watching old men sitting in the park with their children. That's when I'd feel a pinch, a small ache somewhere inside. I'd tell myself it was just nostalgia, but deep down I knew it was guilt. I knew my father was growing old, and I was growing more distant. He never asked me to visit. He'd just say, "Come if you can." And I always found a reason not to. Deadlines, meetings, next month maybe. The truth was, I didn't know how to face him anymore. Too much time had passed, and silence had built a wall that words couldn't easily break. One winter night, after years apart, I got a text from him. It said, "Your old room still looks the same." That's all. No questions, no guilt, just those simple words that carried everything he wanted to say. I didn't reply that night. I told myself I'd call him in the morning, but morning turned into another busy day, and by the time I remembered, it was already night again. That's how it always went. Love postponed for later. Sometimes I'd scroll through our old chat thread. Most of his messages were short. "Good morning. Eat something. Don't stay up too late." Each one looked ordinary, but reading them now feels like opening letters from someone who was always waiting. He never asked for much, just to know I was okay. But I was too busy proving to the world that I could survive on my own. I didn't realize that independence can be lonely when no one is left to care about you. Then one day, everything changed. It was a rainy evening. I was working late at the office when my phone buzzed. It was a call from our neighbor back home. Her voice was trembling. She said, "Your father isn't well." "He's in the hospital." I froze. For a moment, the city around me went silent. I grabbed my bag, ran outside. and booked the first bus I could find. 8 hours later, I was standing in that same town I'd left years ago. The streets looked smaller, quieter, and the house, my childhood home, felt different. It wasn't the house that changed, it was me. When I walked in, the air smelled of medicine and old memories. My father was lying on the bed, pale but peaceful. He looked at me, smiled weakly, and said, "You came." That's all. No anger. No questions about why it took so long. Just a small smile that broke my heart. He was weak, but his eyes still had that calmness I always remembered. I sat beside him, holding his hand, not knowing what to say. All those years of silence filled the room like a heavy fog. After a while, he spoke again, his voice soft and shaky. "We're used to eating alone now." Those words? I can't forget them. He said them with such quiet acceptance, as if loneliness had become a habit. I wanted to speak, to say sorry, to tell him I missed him every day. But my throat closed up. All I could do was sit there and cry quietly, wishing I had come sooner. That night, I stayed by his side. The clock ticked softly on the wall, its sound filling the silence between us. He didn't talk much. He never did. My father was a man who believed that love didn't always need words, that showing up was enough. But that evening, something in his quietness felt heavier. He looked older than I remembered. His hands trembled slightly when he lifted his cup of tea, and his shoulders seemed smaller. I noticed the gray in his hair, the wrinkles around his eyes. Time had moved on, but I hadn't noticed how much it had changed him because I wasn't there to see it. He asked me about my life in the city. I told him it was good, that I was doing well, that I had a job, that everything was fine. He nodded slowly, smiling faintly. "That's good," he said, "as long as you're happy." But there was a pause before his next sentence. He looked at the floor and whispered, "Your mother used to ask about you every night?" Those words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know how to respond. I stared at the cup in my hands, pretending to be focused on it, but my heart felt tight. My mother had passed away 2 years ago, and I hadn't been there for her final moments. I told myself I was too busy, that work wouldn't allow me to take leave. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. I was afraid to come home and see the people I'd left behind. Father didn't blame me. He never did. He just carried on talking softly about little things. The neighbor's new cow, the old tree that had finally been cut down, the cracks in the roof he planned to fix but never did. He spoke like a man filling empty air, trying to keep the room alive with stories, no matter how small. I realized something that night. Silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's what grows between people who have forgotten how to talk. When I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. The small house creaked with every gust of wind. From the next room, I could hear him coughing, trying not to wake me. The sound made me ache inside. I thought about how many nights he must have sat alone like that, coughing, hurting, but never calling anyone. In the morning, I woke to the smell of tea and the faint crackle of a stove. My father was already awake, as always. He used to wake up before sunrise, even when there was no reason to. It was a habit he never lost. He smiled when he saw me, and for a second, it felt like I'd never left. He poured me a cup of tea and placed it in front of me the same way my mother used to. I wanted to say, "Thank you," but the words caught in my throat. We sat there quietly, sipping tea while the morning light crept through the window. The old clock ticked again, the same rhythm it had kept for years. Everything in that house was the same, except me. I was the one who had changed. After breakfast, he said, "Come with me." We walked outside into the small garden my mother had loved. The flowers were still there, not as bright as they used to be, but alive. He knelt down beside them and started pulling weeds, slowly, carefully. Your mother used to talk to these flowers, he said, smiling faintly. She said they listened better than people. I knelt beside him, helping in silence. For a while it felt peaceful, but inside, guilt grew heavier. I wanted to ask him why he never called me more often, why he didn't tell me how lonely he was, why he didn't ask me to come home sooner. But I already knew the answer because he didn't want to burden me. That's who he was. A father who would rather hurt quietly than interrupt his child's life. Later that day, we had lunch together. The food was simple: rice, lentils, and pickles. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something made by his hands. He ate slowly, without saying much. Halfway through the meal, he looked up and said softly, "It feels nice to eat with someone again." That sentence broke something inside me. I lowered my spoon and stared at him. He smiled at me, but his eyes were sad. Tired, maybe. And that's when I realized how lonely he must have been all those years. After my mother died, he had no one left to talk to. He probably ate every meal alone, day after day, pretending not to mind. I excused myself and went outside, pretending I needed air. But really, I just didn't want him to see the tears in my eyes. I stood under the tree in the yard, the one that used to be my climbing spot when I was a kid. I remembered him standing below it, shouting for me to come down, pretending to be angry, but smiling the moment I jumped. Everything about that house carried pieces of him, of us, hidden in every corner. That evening, I told him I'd stay for a few days. He looked surprised, but happy. "Stay as long as you can," he said. "The house feels warmer when you're here." That night, I sat with him again. He told me stories from his younger days, things I'd never heard before. How he met my mother at a small fair, how they built this house together, brick by brick, how proud he was the day I graduated. As he spoke, I realized he wasn't just sharing memories, he was giving me pieces of himself, little fragments of his life that I'd missed. When he grew tired, I helped him to bed. He said, "Good night, son." And I replied softly, "Good night, Dad." It was the first time I'd said it in years. As I lay in my room, I thought about everything I'd missed. Birthdays, anniversaries, ordinary mornings like this one. I thought about how life in the city never gave me peace, no matter how successful I pretended to be. And I promised myself, tomorrow I'd tell him everything. How sorry I was, how much I missed him, how I wished I'd come home sooner. But sometimes tomorrow doesn't come the way you plan. The next morning started like any other. The sky was pale gray and a light drizzle tapped against the window. My father was sitting on the porch when I woke up, holding his cup of tea and watching the rain fall on the empty road. There was something peaceful about that image. An old man and his silence. I joined him quietly, wrapping my shawl around my shoulders. He smiled without turning his head. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning, Dad," I replied, taking the cup he had already poured for me. For a few minutes, we sat without speaking. The sound of the rain filled the air between us. I thought about all the times I'd been too busy to call him, too tired to visit. Sitting there, it felt foolish. All those excuses, all those missed moments. He broke the silence first. "You know," he said, "I still make tea for two every morning." Even when I'm alone, I turn to look at him. His face didn't show pain, just a quiet acceptance that made it even harder to bear. He continued, "Your mother used to say that one day you'd come home for good. She said the house wouldn't stay empty forever." He chuckled softly, looking down at his hands. "I guess she was right, after all." I forced a smile. "I'm here now," he nodded. "Yes, you are." Then almost in a whisper, he said, "But it took a long time." That line stayed with me for the rest of the day. It wasn't said to hurt me. It was just the truth. A truth spoken so gently, it cut even deeper. Later that afternoon, I went into town to buy some groceries. When I returned, I saw him standing in the yard, looking at the old mailbox. He seemed lost in thought. "What are you doing, Dad?" I asked. He smiled faintly. I was just remembering how I used to wait by this mailbox every week. You used to send letters when you first left, remember? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember. I used to read them over and over, he said, even after the words started fading. I looked away, pretending to fix the bag of groceries in my hand. I didn't want him to see the guilt on my face. I had stopped writing those letters long ago. Life in the city had taken over, and calling once a month had felt like enough. But to him, it wasn't. To him, those letters were the only pieces of me he had left. He sighed, gently patting the old mailbox. When the letters stopped coming, I told myself you were just busy. That's what fathers do. They make excuses for their children so they can sleep better at night. His words lingered like the smell of rain. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that I missed those days too. But before I could speak, he smiled again and said, "It's all right. You're here now. That's all that matters." That evening, we had dinner together. The electricity went out halfway through the meal, so we ate by candlelight, like old times. He laughed when I complained about the heat. "You've forgotten how to live without machines," he said. I laughed too, but deep down, I knew he was right. I'd forgotten how to live simply, how to enjoy a quiet night without noise, how to find peace in silence. After dinner, he brought out an old photo album. The cover was worn, the corners bent. We sat side by side on the sofa, flipping through the pages. There were pictures of me as a child, my first bicycle, my mother smiling beside me, my father holding me on his shoulders. He pointed at one picture where I was holding a small wooden toy truck. "Do you remember this?" he asked. I nodded, smiling faintly. "You made it for me." He chuckled. "You wanted a big one, but I didn't have enough wood." "You cried." For a week, we both laughed. For a few moments, it felt like time had turned back. The laughter filled the house again, and I saw a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. But laughter fades quickly when regret sits in your chest. When the last page turned, I saw a photo of my mother. She was sitting at the dining table, smiling at the camera. My father's hand was resting on hers. The background was the same house, the same walls. Only time had changed. I stared at that picture for a long time. "She missed you a lot," he said softly, "even in her last days." I swallowed hard. "I know." "She used to look at that door every evening," he continued, pointing at the entrance. "She always said, 'He'll walk in today.' Every day she believed that." I couldn't look at him. My throat burned. My eyes stung. "I wanted to come, Dad," I whispered. "I really did." He nodded. "I know you did." Then, with a deep sigh, he said, "It's strange, isn't it? How we think we have time. We always think we'll make things right later." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock. The same clock that had watched us grow, fight, laugh, and leave. When I passed his room, I saw his light still on. I peeked in and saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, holding something in his hands. It was one of my old letters. The paper, yellowed and creased, he was reading it slowly, his lips moving as if repeating my words. I wanted to go in to tell him how much I regretted staying away, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was the realization that no apology could bring back the years I'd lost. I returned to my room and sat by the window, watching the rain return. I thought about how life had drifted us apart, not because of distance, but because of choices. I'd chosen ambition over presence, independence over connection, and now, sitting in that quiet house, I felt the weight of every choice pressing down on me. Before I fell asleep, I made a silent promise. Tomorrow, I would tell him everything. The guilt, the love, the regret. I wouldn't wait any longer. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The next morning was strangely quiet. No sound of the kettle boiling, no clinking of cups, no humming from the porch. For a second, I thought maybe I'd just woken up too early. But when I looked at the clock, it was already 7:30. My father never missed his morning tea. I got up and walked to his room. The door was slightly open. He was still in bed, lying on his side, his hand resting near the edge as if he had fallen asleep reading again. "Dad?" I called softly. No answer. I stepped closer, my heart already heavy with something I didn't want to name. "Dad?" I said again, this time louder. Still no response. The stillness in the room was unbearable. His chest wasn't moving. His teacup from last night sat untouched on the table, and beside it was that same old letter, the one I had seen him reading the night before. My knees gave way before I could even think. I dropped beside the bed, shaking his shoulder gently. "Dad, wake up," I whispered. "Please. It's morning." But he didn't move. He was gone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The silence screamed louder than any sound I'd ever heard. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the air felt heavy, almost cruel. I held his hand. It was still warm, and I wished I could pull him back somehow. He had left this world quietly, just like he had lived, without complaint, without noise, without asking for anything in return. The next few hours passed in a blur. Relatives came, neighbors whispered, there were hands on my shoulder, voices offering comfort, but none of it reached me. My world had shrunk to that one image. My father lying peacefully, his last expression calm, almost content. Later that afternoon, when I was sitting alone in the living room, I saw a small folded piece of paper on the table. It had my name on it, in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper was thin and soft, worn around the edges. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. "Son, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gone to your mother. Don't be sad. I've had a full life. You gave me more happiness than you realize. Every time you called, every visit, even the short ones, they meant everything. I only wish we'd eaten together a little more often, but don't carry guilt, my boy. Parents never stop loving their children. Love, Dad." I read those words again and again until the ink blurred through my tears. That one sentence, "I only wish we'd eaten together a little more often," felt like it carried a lifetime of meaning. That night, after the funeral, I sat alone at the dining table, the same one we'd shared meals on for years. There were 2 plates on it, one empty, one untouched. The candle beside me flickered softly, casting shadows across the room. I remembered something he had said the first night I arrived. "We're used to eating alone now." At the time, I thought it was just a sad remark. But now I understand. It wasn't about food. It was about all the moments I hadn't been there. The dinners were missed, the conversations that never happened, the silence that had become his companion. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the spot where he used to sit. I could almost hear him humming under his breath, could almost see the faint smile he wore even when things were hard. And then it hit me. Regret doesn't arrive all at once. It comes quietly, like the sound of rain against glass, steady and cold. The next morning, I went through his belongings. Not out of obligation, but out of need. I wanted to know him better, even if it was too late. In a small wooden drawer by his bed, I found a stack of letters, all the ones I had sent him years ago. He had kept every single one, even the shortest ones, even the ones where I only talked about my job or the weather. Each one was folded neatly, some tied with a ribbon, some marked with a small note. One of them had, "Read this when you miss home," written on the corner, in my handwriting. I couldn't stop the tears anymore. I realized he had read these letters again and again, maybe on the nights he felt lonely, maybe on the nights he wished he could hear my voice. And all that time, I thought he was fine. I had thought old age was peaceful, that he had his routines and didn't need me as much. I was wrong. Later that day, as I stood outside the house, the wind carried the scent of wet earth. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. The light hit the porch where he used to sit every morning, and I could almost picture him there, cup in hand, watching the world pass by. I sat down in his spot, letting the silence wrap around me. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt like he was there, still listening, still watching over me. I whispered softly, "I'm sorry, Dad." For a long time, I stayed there. I didn't move. I didn't want the moment to end. When I finally got up to leave, I turned to look at the house once more. It was small, quiet, and full of memories. And even though it hurt, I was grateful. Grateful for every word, every silence, every lesson he had left behind. As I walked down the old dirt path, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't peaceful yet, but it was close. The next morning, I woke up early. The house felt different, not silent, but hollow. The smell of my mother's cooking was gone. The faint echo of my father's morning cough was missing. It was as if the air had forgotten them. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the empty chairs. My father's chair had a slight dent on the seat where he always sat. I ran my hand over it, like touching it would somehow bring him back. I whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry." I should have come sooner. I found an old envelope tucked near the photo frame on the table. It was addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note, written in my father's uneven handwriting. "Son, your mother and I never wanted to be a burden. We just wanted you to be happy. We are proud of you. Don't let guilt eat you. Live your life. But remember, a house isn't a home until it has love and laughter in it. Love, Dad." I read it again and again. Each word hit me like a quiet wave. He didn't blame me. He didn't ask for anything. Even in death, he was still teaching me, gently, without anger, without bitterness. For the first time in years, I cried, really cried. Not the kind of crying where you hide your face and try to stop, but the kind that cleanses you from the inside, the kind that lets out everything you never said. When I finally calmed down, I made tea. I sat at the table, poured a cup in front of my father's chair, and one for myself. It felt strange at first, but then peaceful. I took a sip and said softly, "You're right, Dad." I understand now. Later that evening, I visited the small cemetery behind our old church. My parents' graves were side by side, with simple headstones. I placed a flower between them and stood there quietly. The wind blew softly, moving the leaves like whispers. "I'm sorry for being late," I said, "but I'm here now." For a moment, I felt like the wind carried a familiar warmth, like my father's gentle hand on my shoulder. On my way back, I walked past the street where I used to play as a child. The neighbors' houses still looked the same, though many faces had changed. I passed by the small shop where my father once bought me candy after school. The owner, an old man now, recognized me and said, "You look just like your father." Kind eyes, quiet smile, I smiles back, fighting tears. "He was a good man," I said. The shopkeeper nodded slowly. "Yes, he was. He used to talk about you all the time. Said he was proud, even when you were far away." Those words stayed with me. My father never stopped being proud of me. He never stopped loving me, even when I gave him so little in return. When I returned to the city, I felt something had changed in me. I began calling my own son every night, even when he was busy or tired. I listened more. I asked how he was doing, even if he didn't always answer. Sometimes, when I sat at the dinner table with my wife, I'd pause before eating. I'd think about those nights when my father said, "We're used to eating alone now." That one line, spoken so softly, became a lifetime lesson. Because love, I realized, isn't always loud. It's not always shown through big gestures. Sometimes it's in the quiet waiting, the unspoken care, the hope that one day someone will come home again. I started visiting nursing homes and community centers, spending time with elderly people who had no one to talk to. Some of them reminded me of my father, patient, quiet, waiting for a knock on the door that never came. I didn't tell them my story, I just listened to theirs, and in every story I found a part of my father. His kindness, his patience, his silent strength. Years passed. My own hair began to gray. My son got married, and one day he moved out too. The night before he left, he came to me and said, "Dad, I'll visit often." "I promise," I smiled gently. "Just take care of yourself," I said. "That's what matters." But after he left, I sat at the dinner table, looking at the empty chair beside me. The words escaped my mouth before I could stop them. "We're used to eating alone now." And when I heard myself say that, I froze. It was my father's voice coming out of mine. The same tone, the same sadness. In that moment, I understood what he must have felt. The silence, the waiting, the tiny hope that someone might come home. So I stood up, grabbed my phone, and called my son. He answered, surprised. "Dad? Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yes, everything's fine. I just wanted to hear your voice." He chuckled softly. "You miss me already?" "Maybe I do," I said. "Maybe I finally understand what my father felt." That night, I slept peacefully because I knew as long as we keep the connection alive, even a single call, a single word can fill the silence that once hurt so much. Now, when I think about my father, I don't think about guilt anymore. I think about gratitude. He gave me the kind of love that doesn't demand anything in return, the kind that waits quietly, hoping you'll find your way back someday. Sometimes I sit by the window holding a cup of tea and whisper, "I hope you know I finally understand." In my mind, I can almost hear his voice, calm, kind, full of warmth, saying, "I always knew you would." And that's when I smile, because I realize that love, even when it's silent, never dies. It lingers in our habits, in our words, in the way we care for others. It passes down quietly from one generation to the next. If you still have parents waiting for your call, don't wait. Call them tonight, visit them this weekend, sit with them, even if it's just for a few minutes, because one day their chair will be empty and all you'll have left are the words they once said. Words like, "We're used to eating alone now, but maybe if you reach out today, those words will never have to be said again." And that's the lesson my father left me. Now, when I think about my father, I don't think about guilt anymore. I think about gratitude. He gave me the kind of love that doesn't demand anything in return, the kind that waits quietly, hoping you'll find your way back someday. Sometimes I sit by the window holding a cup of tea and whisper, "I hope you know I finally understand." In my mind, I can almost hear his voice, calm, kind, full of warmth, saying, "I always knew you would." And that's when I smile, because I realize that love, even when it's silent, never dies. It lingers in our habits, in our words, in the way we care for others. It passes down quietly from one generation to the next. If you still have parents waiting for your call, don't wait. Call them tonight, visit them this weekend, sit with them, even if it's just for a few minutes, because one day their chair will be empty and all you'll have left are the words they once said. Words like, "We're used to eating alone now, but maybe if you reach out today, those words will never have to be said again." And that's the lesson my father left me.